Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. Fundamentals of Harmony is for everyone of all levels. This is harmony in the French style. It's for anyone who wants to go back to basics. I highly recommend it if you're struggling with fugue or orchestration. Let's begin. So we're in season 2 of root position chords. And in season 1, we worked on just the basics of the basics of the basics. And now we're bringing in sequences and modulations. So this was the exercise that we did in the last episode. It's been some time, but I want to do a new episode to kind of refresh us and move forward. So some of the things that we worked on, notice at the ending we have a plagal cadence, right? We saw that right away because we did le chiffre, as they say in French. We put in the Roman numerals, and we saw the bass was doing a 4-to-1. Now, a plagal cadence technically is just 4-to-1, but usually cadences are 3-note affairs, so there's a chord before. In this case, it's a 6-4-1. It's very smooth, and there's usually a soprano that goes along with this. So there's a formula that we've seen from multiple episodes that we applied, and the formula is tonic, tonic, tonic in soprano. This is why you have to do exercises on a regular basis, because then you're going to see it with your own eyes and sense it intuitively instead of relying on intellectual knowledge, which will not get you very far for these exercises. So we figured out it was a plagal cadence with the soprano doing tonic, 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 and then we filled in the middle voices. And then we got the chord prior. So the chord prior is a 5, it's going to a 6, so that's a deceptive cadence. Again, there are basic rules for the deceptive cadence that make it a lot easier to do these exercises quickly when you know them well. So leading tone goes up to the tonic, other voices have to move in opposite direction to the bass. Then we also notice what's called the bas de prolongation. Okay, so this line here, okay, I indicated on the exercise on the website, but what that line means is that the harmony is staying the same, though one or more voices is moving. I haven't found a good translation yet in English, but I think for now, I'll just call it the line of constant harmony. And so basically, when you see this line, what it means is you have to be ready to move a soprano, often arpeggio, or move an inner voice. So usually it's going to be the soprano. So we experimented with a soprano, and we found something that's quite nice, but then we noticed that there are parallel octaves, okay? So another thing you have to think about is the rate of harmonic change. So we can see at the beginning of the exercise, it has dotted quarter equals 50. So that means that's, rather slow, but nevertheless, the main pulse is 1, 1, 1. So that means if we have an octave on a downbeat or even sooner, and then the next measure, then that's going to feel like parallel octaves. So we had to be innovative, and we used a voice exchange with the tenor to avoid any sensation of parallel octaves. Now that is a more advanced step, but I have to bring it in because you're going to need every trick up your sleeve to be able to do more difficult exercises, but also to be ready for fugue and orchestration. All right, next we voice a perfect authentic cadence in the relative key. So this exercise is in B minor, but as I mentioned, we're now doing modulations in sequences. There's no sequence yet in this exercise. So we go to the relative, which is D major. And very, very important rules for root position chords, just in general with harmony, is you cannot have a perfect authentic cadence in the middle of an exercise. It's going to kill the piece. But that's for the tonic key. So we're in B minor, and we cannot have a perfect authentic cadence in B minor in the middle of a piece because the listener will feel the piece is over. Now, when it comes to, symphonies and larger music, then it's on a different scale, okay? But this is like, you have to think this is an entire piece, so we cannot kill the piece this soon. However, when you're in other keys, it can be very nice to do a perfect authentic cadence. For example, if you look at, Bach fugues, right? He often ends the exposition, maybe in the dominant or the relative. There's a really sharp, clean, perfect authentic cadence, and then starts afresh, maybe 1, 2 voices, often 2 voices, and continues to fugue. So that is a very, very nice way to mark the form. So we tested out the perfect authentic cadence. And notice that the soprano is doing 2, 7, 1. Okay, that's another formula, and I do not recommend memorizing the formulas unless you are getting experienced enough that it actually provides value. If you try to usurp the actual experience of doing the exercises by hand, and you just memorize formulas, you're not going to learn harmony. It's very superficial. You may think you're learning harmony, you may see some initial growth, but it's nothing that we can use for fugue and orchestration, and certainly not for composition. Another thing to keep in mind is harmony exercises is about training your intuition. You shouldn't be going off to compose later and then trying to apply the rules, because what's going to happen is you're going to misapply and you're going to have music that's kind of stale and too pure. We want that exciting stuff, but we also want you to have that trained intuition. So we voice the perfect authentic cadence in the relative. And then we noticed that there was another cadence, okay? We see a 5-1 in the bass in B minor. So what I just say, you cannot voice this as a perfect authentic cadence. It's going to kill the piece. So we had to try a lot of different solutions, but in one of the solutions, we got the fa, si, re, do. Okay, so we did an arpeggio. And again, this is because we have this line of prolongation, okay, la barre de prolongation, what I'm calling the line of constant harmony, which indicates that one of the voices is going to be moving around on the same harmony. In this case, it's the soprano. And we can see a clear function here. It's to get us to a higher elevation. So we're in the middle of an exercise, and usually if this is the very beginning of an exercise, I say, make sure that you sing it at different tempos so you get it in your system, make sure you copy down correctly, all that. But we're in the middle, so we'll just continue from there. So we need to do an inventory, okay? So one of the dangers right now is you go for what's easy and simple, okay? You want to get that quick win, and it can be nice. Sometimes you just got to get that confidence going up. So for example, the opening won't take very long to realize there's something crazy going on. So if you have some experience, you know to start on the third, and it kind of realizes it itself. But I want to focus on what's most difficult, because when you have a teacher, it's a different story, right? They're doing the hard work, they're doing the corrections. You're doing the hard work, but they're giving you the corrections, so you can afford to take your time. But when you're studying harmony on your own, especially in the French style, you cannot waste your time. You want to be more planned and diligent so that you have more time to get to composition, to do things you really, really love. So I'm going to do an inventory of what's difficult in this exercise. I'm going to tackle those difficult sections first. So the first thing is notice the ending of phrase 1 in D major, and then we begin phrase 2. So how am I going to manage this transition? We already did the perfect authentic cadence, but something I want to know is the soprano going to stay in the same note, right? That could be kind of boring, though maybe in a temporary sense it works fine. Maybe the soprano is going to be leaping. Also notice that we have that barre de prolongation, as we say in French, or what I'm currently calling in English the line of constant harmony. Maybe I'll find a better term. So though the bass is still, there is an expectation that one or more voices is going to be moving around. Often it's going to be the soprano. So my question is, am I going to do an arpeggio there? Am I going to have to change elevations? So there's a lot of unknown. I want to tackle it quickly. So the first thing I try out is keeping the soprano on the same note. This can be extremely, extremely effective for key changes. When you go on to more advanced harmony, if you do the Henri Chalon book series, book 2 is modulations and sequences, you will find a lot of times he wants you to have that soprano as a note commune, we say in French, a constant same note across the transition, because it makes it really nice and seamless. Sometimes it doesn't work. Many times it doesn't work, but many times it does. So I put that, kept the same note in the soprano, and then I follow the path of least resistance. We've talked about this a number of times, but I'll just restate it again. What that means is basic good voice leading. Voices move as little as possible. Okay, move by step, then by stay on the same note, move by step, and then you're going to leap. Doesn't always work though. Then we have a deceptive cadence. So there's specific rules for deceptive cadence. So we have the leading tone in the soprano, so it's going to resolve up to the tonic as we would expect. Question I have here is I get to this E in the soprano with the bass. So there's that line of constant harmony. So am I going to change elevation? What am I going to do? Okay, next I'm going to try switching the soprano, because sometimes when you have a key change, okay, it's the end of one phrase, start of a new phrase, you want to kind of reshuffle things, and this might be a good opportunity. Now, definitely you want to oppose the direction of the bass. You don't want soprano moving in the same direction as the bass for a kind of sensitive moment like this. So here I have the soprano going to the third of the four chord, which can be a really, really nice, sweet effect. It's something that there's kind of a tendency in harmony exercises. You want the third, though in minor keys it's even more pronounced. Follow the path of least resistance as long as possible, okay? This is what's going to get you going in exercise, but you do have to be ready at some point to switch it up. It doesn't always work. Now, one thing to bring your attention to is notice that we get a soprano that gets quite low. In particular, it gets very close to the bass. So first it gets to a 12th. Okay, fine. Ça va, as we say in French. Then it gets to a 10th. Okay, pas de problème, if it's in French. Not inherently a problem, but remember that the minimum distance between bass and soprano is going to be an octave. If you go less than an octave, there will be no room for the alto and tenor. So this could be a problem, or perhaps I will use this line of constant harmony, or barre de prolongation, to my advantage to maybe do an arpeggio here to get to a new elevation. This is why it's really important that you do un bon analyse, as it's in French, meaning a very thorough analysis, and you take note of the Roman numerals when you have the bass provided, and you pay attention to important indications like the sharps, okay, when we're in the minor section, as well as that barre de prolongation. All right, so I've done a little bit of a survey of the difficulties that await me. I've started testing the waters, but I haven't fully committed. At a certain point, you have to commit, or you have to try something out and see it, and just be ready to accept that it won't be the right solution. You'll have to start over. Instead of just trying to plan, you do got to plan if you want to save time, but at a certain point, you just have to jump in. So, delicate balance. So I want to test the middle voices, because the big danger is that I compose or write a soprano line that's quite nice and pleasing to the ear, has really nice intervals with the bass, but then once the exercise is over and I go to realize the middle voices, c'est pas possible, it's in French, meaning you can't realize it. So using the solution where the soprano keeps its note, follow the path of least resistance. So on bouge le moins possible, it's in French, you move as little as possible, but of course you got to be ready to do some jiu-jitsu moves, shall we say, to rebalance the chord when necessary. Notice there's a deceptive cadence. Deceptive cadence is essential, okay? It is the bare minimum of what I expect in this course, and if you do choose to submit your work and get corrections and get public corrections, which I'll give more information about at the end, one of the first things I look for is no parallel fifths, no parallel octaves, and the deceptive cadence has to be properly voiced. The deceptive cadence is very simple. The leading tone goes up to the tonic, and the other voices move in opposite direction to the bass. This is in your complete and utter control. There are a lot of things that it just takes time to see, like writing a nice soprano, thinking about the distances, how do I get out of the cadence, all kinds of things. But proper, no parallel fifths, no parallel octaves, and proper voicing and deceptive cadence, it is your complete and utter control. And when you submit the work, I will not correct the work if I find these kinds of faults, okay? Because it shows a lack of, self-ownership. All right, so we notice that the soprano goes up to the tonic, and the other voices are moving in opposite direction to the bass. Bingo! All right, so next, notice that we have the bass doing G-A or saute la, all right? So that's stepwise motion. For root position chords, when the bass moves by step, the other voices move in opposite direction in order to avoid parallel fifths and parallel octaves. This is the beauty of the French way of explaining harmony, because they make it trop bon, trop simple, okay? As we say in French, just very easy and simple, at least in terms of just understanding. Of course, it takes time to master these things and to revoice, but it just, bass moves by step, other voices move in opposite direction to the bass, okay? Except for deceptive cadence, which the leading tone does have to go in the same direction. Now, one thing to notice is that the bass is leaping an octave. An octave is very dramatic, so it's going to suck up your attention maybe, and maybe you won't notice that there's stepwise motion by the bass. But no matter how you look at it, G to A, it is always going to follow those rules for stepwise motion. Now, notice with this solution that there is a problem, okay? So one of the frustrating things about harmony, because it's not very creative, right? There's all these rules, and as soon as you have one thing is good, check mark, no, something else is a problem. Kind of like counterpoint studies, but this is like even more serious, okay? Because this is even before counterpoint. But one of the things you have to look at are the distances between voices, because when you go to do orchestration or fugue, you want the chords to be balanced, okay? You want to have resonance, and you don't want to just get to chords and, well, I don't know how to redo this, so I'm stuck with it, right? You want flexibility. So in harmony, in the French style, the maximum distance between bass and tenor is a 12th, okay? Though a tenth is much preferred, okay? So here we have 2 octaves between the bass and the tenor on a weak beat. So maybe, in French you say ça passe, okay, maybe the ear wouldn't really appreciate it, but it is still quite large. And then notice the next measure, we have a 12th distance. I did mention that the 12th is the maximum you can possibly have, but that's for extreme circumstances. It usually works better in passing motion. The ear is much more tolerant of having a tenth distance, okay? Now, one thing to mention is this is a specific study. When you go on to orchestration or fugue, if you try to apply this in that or apply this in composition, you'll probably have something really boring or you'll misapply. Obviously, when you go to composition, you can have wider distances, you can do all kinds of things, but this is a very stylized study. So something you may want to do is to say, okay, obviously I don't have the right soprano. I may have to adjust the soprano, or maybe you want to keep the soprano and you want to adjust the middle voices. So here, notice that I shifted the middle voices. So the chord is a G chord, so it's a 4 chord. So we have the same harmony and the voices are moving at the same time to rebalance the chord. Notice in this new solution, we have a tenth distance from the bass to tenor, which then goes to an 8. Also remember, it still is a stepwise motion, so you want to make sure the other voices are still opposing the bass. I think this works well. The one thing to mention is that usually we learn to have simultaneous leaps is not acceptable, especially with the bass, especially if you're going to octaves or perfect fifths, because that can sound like parallel fifths or parallel octaves, even though they technically aren't. However, there is an exception when we have the same harmony. When you're on the same harmony, many times you'll see, for example, in Bach chorales, right? He ends a phrase on a 1, and he starts another phrase on that same harmony, the same chord, but he's changed the elevation, and you'll notice across the phrase, technically, there's all these crazy leaps. This is acceptable for the human ear. I would like to do a future tutorial, maybe a shorts tutorial or more in-depth information about this, but for now I don't have the time. But if you want to get more direct information, just look at Bach chorales and you'll see for yourself that there's many times he'll revoice the chord for the same chord. So that is not an issue here. Now, what is an issue is, notice with this voice leading that we get to an incomplete chord. So when you get to an incomplete chord, that is completely unacceptable for root position chords. You need to have complete harmony. So either you're going to have to readjust the middle voices, maybe you don't even have the correct soprano to begin with, maybe you have to adjust the soprano. So this is why I said I want, il faut cibler, we say in French, you should target these difficult sections, because there's so many things that you have to work out, and you're probably just going to have to test a lot of different solutions until you find the right one. Not to mention that we have this bas de prolongation, or line of constant harmony, which means there's going to be some kind of arpeggio going on, probably in the soprano. Now, we did all this extensive work, though we didn't really get that far, but I'm hoping that you can see the strategy you have to do to master harmony on your own. But we have a primordial problem. Notice that later in the exercise, when we're back in B minor, for that imperfect accented cadence, which took a lot of work to realize, We followed the bas de prolongation, or the line of constant harmony. We did an arpeggio. We thought it was quite nice. But on a subsequent listen or a subsequent analysis, notice that it's a 5 going to another 5. Keep in mind the rate of harmonic change. The dotted quarter is going to get the note value. So that means that here you're going to hear si fa, fa do. Okay, we have parallel fifths. So all that stuff we were doing before with the transition, that has to be put aside because this is an existential problem. It is not acceptable, and of course, I cannot accept your work if there are parallel fifths. So you gotta fix that immediately. If you would like to do this work, the exercises are on my website. You can do it for yourself and test it out, see if you like harmony in the French style. I am currently accepting submissions of completed assignments, either if you have the bass and soprano, realize it has to be complete, or if you want to do all 4 voices, so bass, soprano, alto, tenor, it has to be complete. All the voices are filled out. If you're doing all 4 voices, make sure you do not have parallel fifths and parallel octaves, and make sure the deceptive cadence is properly voiced. Otherwise, I will not be able to correct it, and these corrections will be published on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.